Welcome to Ignite Agility. Today I have Edie Berteau with me.
Hello, happy to be here.
Edie is one of my certified Scrum professional Scrum Master graduates. So congratulations, Edie.
Thank you.
And we thought we'd talk to you all about retrospectives. We're going to call this our retrospective refresh. Now, you're not going to hear me say something like, oh, be sure to like and subscribe or stay till the end, because we're going to slip all the how-to, all of our advice in the podcast with each pitfall. And we're going to cover 3. So ha, ha, ha. Now, if you do want to stay till the end, we're going to have a little bonus for you.
Yes.
Absolutely. Okay, so Edie, let's talk about what the first pitfall is that as a Scrum Master you've seen happen in Scrum adoptions you've worked in.
I think it's pretty common to see surface level discussions in retrospectives, and we'll get more into like why that might be, but retrospectives sometimes remain at that high level, the superficial level, where teams only discuss maybe minor issues that feel less tense, or maybe like an easier, I don't know, what's the word? Low-hanging fruit. That's the cliche I was looking for. And they avoid delving into deeper problems. And so I do feel like this limits the opportunity for continuous improvement, and it limits the use of those 3 Scrum pillars that are all intertwined in the retrospective concept of inspection, adaptation, and transparency.
For sure. A lot of people, I think, assume incorrectly that the retro is, oh, isn't that our time to get together to talk about how Scrum's going?
Right.
What a waste of time. I mean, Scrum's a framework. It's no, it's that
It's there to help you do your work.
That transparency, inspect, adapt that you just mentioned. It's getting to root cause of what in our process we actually need to address. So I hear you with the superficial or being too nice or artificial harmony, whatever you want to call it. What have you found to remedy that? What can some Scrum Masters listening do to overcome that surface level stuff?
Yeah, there's a couple ways to intervene, I guess I would call it, as you're the facilitator for the retrospectives. The first one is to gently intervene and keep the conversation moving along. There's different techniques for that. You can start simple with asking open-ended questions of, can you give me an example of that, or what impact did that have? That helps the team practice getting deeper into those conversations and finding, like you said, the root cause.
Very process-oriented too, I think. You know what I mean? If they get the sense that it's about them, they may not want to go a little deeper. So keep it on process, not people.
Absolutely.
So, hey, we're not talking about who did what or anything personal. It's just business. We're just going to get right into the process.
And if there are interpersonal issues on the team, retrospective may be a good opportunity to address that. It may not be. And so it's certainly not excluding that opportunity, but it doesn't have to be well, I didn't like what John did this sprint, and so I'm going to confront him in front of the whole team.
Yeah, that's better one-on-one.
Yeah, it's
better to let people
save
face.
It absolutely is. And so there are more of those techniques. You can ask like the 5 whys. Keep asking why. That helps you delve deeper into a certain situation. If you're seeing a symptom, but you're not sure what the problem is, that might help you get deeper into that problem.
My advice with 5 whys, in case people aren't familiar with it, is sometimes if you just follow it verbatim, why, why? Sometimes people get annoyed and they're like, gosh, you sound like you're 4. Why do you keep asking why? Or I have seen other behavioral styles get defensive, thinking you're challenging them, not the idea. So if a Scrum Master is doing the 5 whys in their head, to get to root cause, kind of keeping track, they may just have to use different words.
Yeah, for sure.
Like I heard you say, why is that important? Why is that happening? More of a full sentence rather than just the why.
And it's important to take note of what behaviors you're seeing, whether someone looks tense or uncomfortable, or if they're crossing their arms and they look defensive. That's a classic example. But like you said, changing the words can be really helpful. A simple how come is often just as effective as a why, but it feels less like an attack, like some people may feel from the word why.
People get defensive.
Yeah.
Anything else on that one before we move on to our second pitfall?
I do think there's an aspect of personal preference because I think switching up the format of retrospectives can help go a little bit deeper into some topics just because it freshens things up. But there is an aspect of personal preference to that. I like to switch up retro formats because it, like I said, it keeps things fresh. It makes you think about something in a different format and a different perspective. Some people don't like that because they feel like the format or the tool becomes a hindrance to the discussion because you're focusing too much on that. I think that's fine. I don't know that there's an objective right or wrong there. So just make sure to kind of gauge what the team feels about that and if there are any preferences.
When in doubt, ask the team.
Exactly.
So what's the second pitfall you're seeing?
Lack of psychological safety.
That's a big one.
It is a huge one. And that affects a lot more than just the retrospective, but I think it can be very visible in retrospective if there's a lack of psychological safety on the team.
An example I can share that springs to mind, probably one of the worst ones in my career, right? Horror story in my career. I had done a training, and sometimes in a training class, I don't always know what position somebody's in a company because, anybody can come to a public training.
Yeah.
And I don't put pressure on people to say their company name or any of that. So this one person was asking a lot of really specific questions about getting people to talk. Oh, Angela, the problem solver, whipped out all her little tools and techniques and forced fun, like you were just
Forced
talking
fun.
about, right?
It's our favorite.
just loaded them up, right? Well, lo and behold, they hired me to coach at that company after the training class. So I get there and I'm doing, some assessing and just watching why some things are the way they are. I find out that this gentleman is a senior vice president in the company. He's not only attending the retrospectives,
oh no, it's
he's
coming.
Following people back to their desk after the retro, the people who dared to talk and berating them. And I'm like, oh my God, the reason they're not talking is because you're there.
You mean that's the problem?
Right?
Should I stop doing that?
Yes. But now think about Angela, the problem solver, not having any of that context, arming this man.
Being like, forced fun is the key.
Right? With all this stuff. I would go back in time and kick my own ass, but I can't do that. So psychological safety is a big problem.
Absolutely. When team members are hesitant to speak up for whatever reason, the retrospective in itself becomes very performative. Like if there's no psychological safety, there's no point.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to actually resolve any problems that are causing persistent issues or inefficiencies on the team if there's no psychological safety to bring those to the forefront.
And bosses being there is a good way to ensure there's no psychological safety.
Yeah. I used to very much think managers should not be in retrospectives, period. I've kind of lightened on my stance over the years. It depends on the team, I think, which is like, that should be like the trademark for Scrum Master. It depends on the team. I've had teams where having the manager there is really productive because the manager is incredibly receptive to feedback. The team has psychological safety with the manager, and it just shortens, is feedback loop the right term to use on that?
Probably.
Like we don't have to fine tune it or make it sound nice to bring it to the manager to then get, something resolved. It just happens organically in that meeting.
I do think those are fewer and further between.
I agree.
Those situations.
I agree.
So those of you in like huge hierarchical companies listening, not for you. that one's not for you. So what
Ignore that.
tips would you have to overcome psychological safety other than the obvious ones that we just chatted about?
Yeah. So I would set some ground rules, and I try to do this when I join a team. So whether it's a brand new team that's being formed or it's a team that already existed and I'm the new person on the team, it's good to create a shared understanding and manage expectations in many regards. But this example is retrospectives. So maybe the first retrospective you have with the team, you're just observing to see how they normally do it. If you're facilitating, maybe set some ground rules and expectations for what you as the facilitator and Scrum Master view as the value and the format of how people conduct themselves in this meeting. And so that can be things like I'm trying to create a safe space. It's okay to say that right from the front. And I don't know how it's been in the past. I wasn't here, but my what I value is creating a safe place for people to speak up so that we can move on after we've resolved some issues. You can establish a rule like critique the process, not the person, like you said, Angela. And that helps people just remember why we're there and focus on those things. And it's okay to say them over and over again. It takes a long time to ingrain that and feel like you really understand that and you're resonating with it, vibing with it, we could say. Anonymous feedback is really good. This is good for different personality types.
Sure.
I'm introverted. I would be more quick to give anonymous feedback in a meeting where I didn't feel comfortable than I would be to just speak up. And so I like that, especially if I have private time to brainstorm my feedback, either in the meeting or before the meeting, and then I'm able to submit it anonymously. That helps me think through how I want to say something to actually make the point I want to make, rather than say something that I'm like, oh, look, that offended 10 people and I didn't even mean to. But
I like having the board available or whatever you're using to capture that so that you get that time to think. But also sometimes it wastes so much time in the retro.
It can.
Hey, let's now gather anonymous feedback. What? So just having it available during the sprint sometimes even helps people, because if they're put on the spot in the retro and they're like, what was that one thing I was going to bring up? And they just can't recall it.
And this is something that can be ameliorated when you do have psychological safety, but when you don't, this can really help. One thing I tried with the team, I'm not sure it really took off, but I personally loved it, was having a retro mailbox. I literally bought a mailbox and I put little cards and pens next to it, and it was in the like pod desk area where the team sat. And so they could put mail in the mailbox throughout the sprint. I like that because I keep notes because I forget everything if it's not written down. And so that just helped me. It wasn't just like we're going to keep it in the mailbox and like then we're going to open the mailbox and it feels like Blue's Clues. But it's just, let's create a backlog of items that we want to discuss in retro. It can be anonymous.
And you can do that electronically for the people who are listening going, well, wait a minute, we're remote. No, you can still do that with like Mural, idea boards. There's all kinds of tools to let you do that. You were talking about the ground rules and facilitation at the beginning. One of the things I hear some Scrum Masters say is they hate icebreakers. And I just kind of chuckle. And I'm like, I get it if it's like a forced fun kind of icebreaker or it's got a format. It doesn't need to be a big deal.
No.
But there's something about a person hearing their own voice in the room or the virtual room that raises their likelihood to talk.
Yes.
And helps create psychological safety. And my favorite one recently that I stole from a guest at our center here, I was helping them get the projector going, and I heard the facilitator say, while she's doing that, we're just going to go ahead and start with our icebreaker. And I'm like, ooh, fly in the room, right? I get to listen. And they're like, current unpopular opinion, go.
Nice.
And loved it. And one of the first people went, Taylor Swift, don't see what the big deal is.
Those are fighting
music. And
those
the room
are fighting
was just
words,
like,
Angela.
What? I know, but I was laughing because I'm like, I'm stealing that icebreaker,
That is a good one.
Current unpopular opinion.
Are you ready for this? This is going to blow your mind.
Okay.
I work on distributed teams, and when people join the teams meeting, I say hi to them with their name. I know.
That's a little advanced for...
I know, it's a little provocative, but that's what I do because, and these are on smaller meetings. If it's a meeting of like 60 people, I'm not going to list everyone by name and say hello because it's going to get weird.
Well, no, retro should be 60 people.
Right. But if I just say, oh, hi, Laura, how's it going? Then Laura feels pressure to say hi back because I said her name, and that increases her likelihood of talking again. I will also just share things about myself. Because if people are not feeling psychologically safe, they're not going to share things about themselves. I'll do it. What is it called? Introvertuous. I'm here, but I'd rather not be. So I can pretend to be extroverted at work where I will just share something about me that gets people talking. Or what did I do recently? I was like, what was the best lunch you had this week?
But you're being vulnerable first.
Yeah. A little bit. So vulnerable is kind of a heavy word, but like, yeah. Yeah.
And these are really simple things. So hopefully people who thought, oh my God, the pressure of refreshing my retro. No, these are really simple, actionable things. Before we move on to the third pitfall, anything else on establishing psychological safety?
How do I phrase this? Where I think it's so important, but also don't put too much pressure on it, because if it's performative or if it's disingenuine, it's not going to be effective. And so being vulnerable, being authentic, that's the best way to create psychological safety. And it does take time, and that's okay. It's going to take time if there were issues in the past, interpersonal issues on the team. Those take time to resolve, and leaving some space for that to just see some incremental progress and chip away at what might be causing a lack of psychological safety, you're going to make a lot of progress there.
Nice. So the third pitfall that you're seeing out there with retrospectives.
Failure to follow through.
What? We have to actually follow
I
through
know.
on what comes out of a retro?
It's so strange that if you want to see progress, you have to do what you say you're going to do. It's so weird. Yeah. Teams sometimes fail to implement the action items that they agree upon during the conversations in retrospective. Mostly because we're humans and we forget. If it's not written down, if it's not visible, cough, cough, we could put it on the sprint backlog.
Yes.
We look at that anyway.
That was even, I think, I don't know if it's in the current guide, not holding that in my head at the moment, but it was in the last one for sure. Because I remember when they added it, people were like, what? We can put a reminder right on our sprint backlog?
Where we're already looking every day. Yes. Brilliant. I hear that's probably one of the biggest complaints I hear from folks who maybe call themselves anti-retro or feel opposed to retrospectives in general, is they say retrospective isn't valuable because nothing ever changes. And my initial response to that is, why are we blaming our lack of action and accountability on the meeting?
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense to me. The meeting can't do those things for us. The meeting provides transparency and it brings things to the surface to make them visible, but there's no one that's going to do those things for us. The Scrum Master isn't responsible for implementing all the action items in retrospective. You have to actually do them if you want to see progress and if you want to see value out of that meeting.
And a really effective way I've seen a Scrum Master close the retro, and this isn't in the Scrum Guide or isn't mandated by the framework. It's something I learned from Esther Derby, who was one of the founders of the Scrum Alliance and authored Agile Retrospectives with Diana Larson, and I know they have a second edition coming out now. But one of our values in Scrum is focus. So there should be one, no more than two action items. So people are going to have to vote. And if the action item is for the product owner, you know who that's going to.
Right.
Because there's only one of them. But if it's for the team, they're going to have to vote on what they're going to do. But then Esther would always say, who volunteers to make sure this happens?
I like that phrasing.
So that, oh, Edie, you just volunteered. Here you go. So now there's no question, but like you said, it's not the Scrum Master. You're not their adult daycare provider. So that's
I'm not.
One of the things I try to share just as a bonus tip in, like a certified Scrum Master class or something. It's like, you're not going to see this written down anywhere, but if you really want to make sure something actionable is coming out, this is a way to close the retro.
I like that. And if it's on the sprint backlog, you're likely to review when it's done or not done at the end of the sprint, which provides another level and measure of accountability. Right now with my teams, we're using the integrated retrospective tool in Confluence on those pages. And at the bottom, I will put action items, a space for that, for the action items from the current retrospective. But I also copy and paste the action items from the last retrospective onto that page so that we can check them off. Are they done or are they not done? And if they're not done, is there a reason they're not done? Is it important enough that we want to carry it over? Is it still relevant, or do we need to approach it a different way? Like, just having those quick conversations provides another level of accountability.
For sure. And it doesn't need to be too many. Because sometimes, when we were talking about, psychological safety and pitfalls of retrospectives, that may also demotivate people if it's like this huge list that never happens.
And then if you have that on the sprint backlog and it's like, well, I have all these development tasks I need to get done, but also we have 9 action items from retrospective, that can feel overwhelming just to see that. And if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority, keeping it really short if it's 1 or 2. And I've seen where it's like, oh, the team needs to set up a meeting to discuss whatever, best practices for QA. So I don't know. Okay, great. Who's going to send the meeting invitation?
Right, because it's not going to be a Scrum Master. You're not the secretary.
I'm not going to do it. And so if it's going to happen, we need an owner for that action item. Yeah.
Before we move to our closing bonus, anything else on failure to follow through?
I don't think so. I think integrating it with sprint planning is an option. You can make action items part of that sprint planning process. Like we mentioned already, put it on the sprint backlog, whether it's something like implement a code review process. You put a task in the sprint backlog, it's more likely to get done. So I just find ways to make yourself accountable, to see those items again and to review them when they're complete.
One of the things we're doing to kind of refresh, because I know people fall into a rut,
Mm-hmm.
it happens.
It does.
It just happens. Is we're doing 2-hour virtual micro courses, which will let people get new ideas as Scrum Masters for retrospectives. And we have one coming up on October 11th that we'll put in the show notes. But they're eligible also for Scrum education units, as is
Perfect.
this conversation. Anybody who is listening to Edie
You're
and myself, right? You're welcome. You get to earn a free Scrum Alliance SEU or a Project Management Institute PDU. So you'll just have to self-report those. So as a Scrum Master, Edie, what is your bonus, your closing thought on retrospective refresh?
Focus on the quality of the conversation over how you're formatting the meeting. The format or the tool you're using is there to facilitate the conversation, just like you're there to facilitate. Facilitate means make easier. It doesn't mean make it more complex. It doesn't mean make it fancy. If you notice the tool's not working, if the tool is becoming the focus of the meeting or bogging down, burdening the conversation, get rid of it. Go back to a whiteboard that says what went well, what didn't go well, improvements. It's okay to keep it simple. I don't feel like retrospectives need to be complex and fancy, but focus on that quality of conversation. Over time, it will be valuable. You will see improvements from the team. You'll see an increase in psychological safety. We'll get into a culture of following through and accountability. That's great in all aspects of teamwork. So that's my bonus content for you.
Well, thank you so much for helping us refresh our retrospectives,
Thank
Edie.
you. Are we done?
And we're clear.
Okay.